Hello, good evening. Welcome to my weekly podcast. I am Ajit Kumar Jha, the editor of the Public Global and the CEO of the Power Pixar channel. And today we thought, given the fact that the whole world seems to be on the verge of collapse, I thought of again focusing on Donald Trump and the massive trade war that he has begun with 60 countries. Of course, it's being fiercely waged with China and several other countries, including India. Um, Let me first begin with what is the purpose behind Trump's tariffs? Why is he going on uh, sort of raising tariffs almost as high as sort of 50 to 60%? With China now, it's almost 54%. And as we know, right when he became the president, he announced 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum across the board. After that, on April 5th, he has announced 10% tariffs again across for everyone. And then with each country, depending on different sectors, there are different layers of tariffs. On India, for example, 27% tariffs. Now, why has he begun this? That we need to understand, because there are a lot of figures being thrown around and that causes confusion. Essentially, let's talk a little bit about the purpose and the history of tariffs used by other American presidents. Number one, the main reason Trump tariffs have begun is what one would call curtains down on the entire phenomena of globalization. Trump is basically an anti globalizer. Trump and his associates, they feel that globalization has hurt America, not helped it. Remember, globalization was actually started by the US at one time, because at that time, the American presidents, they felt that globalization would help American industry. But the way the process of globalization unfolded, now, even during his first term, in fact, 2016, when Trump came, even at that time, he started almost a trade war against Japan, China, even India, and some other countries. But that was compared to what's going on today. This is like a raging world war, and it has turned the entire world upside down. So that's the main purpose of it. Uh, the other aspect, which is rather what one would find shocking, is that Trump is raising his tariffs against both allies like the European Union, like Canada, one would consider even Mexico, India. So, as I said, against allies as well as against enemies, rivals like China, for example. So, Trump doesn't make much of a distinction between the two when it comes to trade war. So he's basically raising ad valorem duties ranging from 10 to 54% on imports from all trading partners: China, European Union, Africa, Latin America, India, all over the world. As I said, 60 countries have already been targeted. Now, let me go a little bit, give you the history of tariffs. Is it for the first time that American presidents have basically used tariffs? No. In fact, between 1861, and I'm really going back in history, between 1861 and 1933, America had one of the highest average tariff rates on manufactured imports in the world. In fact, it would not be an understatement to say that American industrialization used tariffs at one time when they wanted to protect their domestic industry, and then liberalized when they thought that globalization is going to help them. So in that sense, the most American presidents have been very self-interest based. Uh, it's only after 1942 that the US began to promote worldwide free trade. But remember, that period between 1861 to 1933 might have helped America build the industrial base, but what it led to is a serious economic recession in the year 1929. It is always known as the Great Recession. So ultimately, it did not help the US. The good question would be, will today's trade war help the US? My answer will be no. In fact, I would argue that it is already leading US towards a massive recession. And all their stock markets have gone crazy. Unfortunately, also the stock markets around the world have gone crazy. There is enormous selling pressure, and we will talk about it soon. According to Dartmouth, it's a university in the US, Dartmouth economist Douglas Irwin, tariffs has served three purposes: to raise revenue for the government, the federal government in this case, to restrict imports and protect domestic producers, the infant industry argument that has always been made from, from foreign competition, and to reach reciprocity agreement that reduce trade barriers. In fact, I'll go a little further in history. From 1790 to 1860, average tariffs in the US increased by the US government, increased from 20% to 60%. Then somehow it declined to 20%, and then from 1861 to 1933, which is known as the restriction period, the average tariffs increased to 50% and remained at that level until 1933. From 34 onwards, which is known as the reciprocity period. Earlier period, as I said, from 1861 to 1933 was called the restriction period. The second period from 1934 onwards is known as the reciprocity period. Average tariff started declining, and then it sort of fell down to 5%. And as I said, after 1942, after the World War, when US basically controlled the whole of Europe, uh, especially major powers like Germany and England and France, and the NATO began. Several other things happened. The UN system, the Bretton Woods. When the US was ruling the world as a superpower, then they began the entire idea of free trade. And in 2016, for the first time, when Trump came as president, he tried to put a roadblock there. He tried to stop it and begin this tariff war. But then after 4 years, he lost. And now that he has come back with a vengeance, he's going on doing it. Now, what is the reason? The reason, of course, as I argued, and I've quoted economists who argued that what America felt that their manufacturing base during this period of globalization shifted mainly to China, to Mexico, and partly to other countries, partly to India as well, in the pharma sector and others, IT sector, for example. And that they feel has made the American working class weaker. American working class have declined in terms of its economic status. And that is the reason given that Trump wants to restart what one would call domestic manufacturing. And it sounds like a very noble purpose in many ways. Why not? But the problem is, and let me add, Trump came because of the massive turnout in his support by the American working class, especially the white working class, and partly also, I would argue, the Latino working class, partly even, let's say, a small percentage of black working class. Now, this is what we call the MAGA base of Trump, Make America Great Again. This movement that basically picked up with Trump, and that is the purpose that Trump is trying to serve. So create manufacturing, recreate manufacturing inside the US, and secondly, keep the MAGA base happy for the future elections. There are even talks that Trump might try to actually break the rules of American presidency and contest for the third time. Or even if he doesn't, suppose he's not allowed institutionally, then his vice president, for example, other supporters of Trump would want to continue in the Trumpian fashion, which is very different from the traditional Republican approach. So therefore, when Trump was talking at the White House Rose Garden during at the time when he was announcing the sweeping tariff war against American trade partners, you would have seen, if you would have watched the video or if you saw American television, Trump invited Brian Panebecker, a retired auto worker from Detroit. In fact, Panebecker was dressed in typical green jacket and hard hats, and 20 of his colleagues were there. And they all pointed out after Trump how they support Trump's tariffs and trade wars wholly. So in a way, the fact that he is trying to satisfy his MAGA base. Now, what makes Trump's ambition of raising tariffs against his trading partners, as I said, both allies and adversaries, what makes it different from, let's say, the way trade was carried out under the WTO? One important message is, under the WTO, we had what we call a rules-based order. So international trade followed rules. You couldn't just go on creating bilateral positions. You had to take, initially at least, you had to follow the WTO principles. And the WTO was trying to arrive at a position which was rather equitable for all countries. But then bilateral sort of trade or even forming groups, multilateral trade began, at times even violation of WTO before Trump. And what Trump has began today is what the Chinese finance ministry has called unilateral bullying practice, totally undermining, for example, China's legitimate and lawful rights and interests. So this is a unilateral decision to basically impose arbitrary trade restrictions on every country that is basically trading with the US. In fact, a lot has been written about it, and some of the people have pointed out that the way the tariff is being assessed itself is wrong. The way tariff should be assessed or used to be assessed in the past, whereas the way Trump's advisors are assessing is basically, let me give you an example. What they have done is they have taken the deficit between countries. So, for example, let's say the deficit with the US, India had a massive surplus with the US. England, UK, for example, used to have a deficit with the US. So, but in both cases, they have gone ahead and assessed it rather arbitrarily. Um, Let me give you a precise example which I sort of picked up. It was, by the way, created by the United States Trade Representative, this new formula. And in many ways, critics have pointed out that it is one of the dumbest policy that one has ever seen, as I said, since 1942. Uh, and how have they calculated it? They have divided trade deficit, let's say between US and India, or the massive trade deficit between US and China, by US import of goods from that country. The formula is basically, it creates massive economic distortions to the world economy. What exactly? Let me give you a simpler example. What does this mean? This basically means, take the household level. Suppose I run a trade deficit with a grocery store because they do not buy anything from me. I am the one buying from the neighborhood grocery store. So what do? I can't say, okay, this deficit I will end by creating my own grocery store. That's exactly the policy that the Trump administration is doing. So if you have a deficit, the deficit will, in the long run, end with, greater exports, let's say American exports to China or American exports to India. But instead of falling on that traditional method of ending trade deficit, what Trump has gone ahead and done is what I would call, you know, sort of say, well, I will create my own grocery stores. I will start manufacturing in everything. And that means basically not going by the theory of comparative advantage. I don't want to go into details of economics because it's a general not a very academic a video blog post. But the idea is that some countries specialize in certain things, other countries specialize in other things. So they trade. Suppose I specialize in A and you specialize in B, so I'll give you A, you give me B. That's the idea of a fair trade and a comparative advantage. Each country cannot produce everything, for example. So let me get back and say that what this has led to, because again, we always run out of time. What has happened yesterday, China went and started retaliatory trade because, as I pointed out, the US had created almost 54%. Trump has imposed 54% trade tariffs against China. So China retaliated in a massive way, and that has begun a very serious warfare. In fact, the entire share market all over the world has been slumping down. There are figures. If you look at, let's look at some of the Indian, what the impact on the Indian industry. There is the total tariff turmoil. Companies have lost minus 8.6%, Vedanta, minus 8.6%, Tata Steel, minus 8.5%, Bharat Forge, minus 8%, Hindalco, Tata Motors, minus 6.2%. So Sensex is slumping overall 931 points yesterday. And is there a plus side? Because this is a bloodbath taking place in both the US markets, share markets, which have gone down as low as what had happened at the time of COVID. And it's equally a bloodbath in the share markets all around the world. We are a little notch better, but that was yesterday. what would happen as the share markets open out, let's say today and on Monday, is something that one is trading. Um, the other problem with the way that the deficits is being calculated is that, take the case of India, 26%, then they went up to 27%, then came down to 26%. So this inconsistency, in many cases, they have picked up countries which are very, very small economies, and they have been, countries like Lesotho in Africa. It's a small country, barely a few couple of or $3 billion whole GDP, and they have been hit by a 50% trade deficit. And what does Lesotho sent to America? Diamonds. So it's totally inconsistent. It's totally crazy. The person calculating has made serious errors. In fact, Paul Krugman, the Nobel laureate economist, pointed out that the European Union's, for example, tariffs towards the US was a mere 3%. Whereas the way the American advisors to Trump have calculated, it has turned out to be 39%. So it's ridiculous sort of methods of calculation. And that is what is causing massive uncertainty. And then the changes. One day they'll announce something, and another day there'll be a change. In the case of India, 27%. But the first day when they were announced, they said, okay, but no sort of tariffs against, for example, the pharma sector, gems and jewelry, but especially not against the pharma sector. Why? Because India sends a lot of medicine to the US, and they need it desperately. So, but then the next day, they took another stand. No, we are going to again put tariffs against the pharma sector as well. So then the pharma sector started in the stock market collapsing. So this inconsistency, the wrong methodology, and the way things are going on, it has really, really sent the world in a topsy-turvy. Now, let me get down a little bit. Let's spend 2 minutes. I'll make another a video podcast on this. But let me go back to India. What has happened to India? If you compare the 27% tariffs raised against India to some of our competitors, let's say Vietnam, Indonesia, even China, as I said, 54%, then India is a little better off. Now, two reasons. Of course, Trump keeps saying that Modi is my friend. Also, second, that the Indian way of attempting to sort of negotiate rather than retaliatory tariffs against the US. Modi's approach and India's approach is negotiation. In fact, even as we speak, the Commerce Ministry under Piyush Goyal is trying to come up with a formula which hopefully will be out by October, November, which is to do a bilateral kind of a attempt is a bilateral free trade agreement between the US and India. Now, that will take some time. Trump could have waited till then. He didn't have to go around this muscular approach, aggressive approach of hitting at allies and at rivals at the same time, because what has happened that suddenly the old world order, rules-based order, the equilibrium during globalization have gone for a toss, and today every country is fighting its own battle. Every country is trying to save itself. And remember, it's not only that Trump's policies of imposing tariffs on India is hurting India. There are indirect ways of getting hurt. For example, number one, when Trump pushes 54% tariffs on China, then what happens? The Chinese exports to US stops, almost freezes. So then China starts dumping more and more goods into India, into other big markets where it can sell its stuff. So that again impacts the Indian producers. So the infant industry in India will get hurt. So that is one. Number two, the turmoil in the US market affects a lot of companies in India that have a massive exposure to the US. For example, the IT industry. Our entire IT industry, software industry, is basically linked to Silicon Valley. The one sitting in Bangalore, Hyderabad, Gurgaon, and other places is linked to Silicon Valley. So once Silicon Valley goes into topsy-turvy, it has ripple effects, serious ripple effects on our industry. So one could go on and on. In fact, things are still unfolding, and our Commerce Ministry is sitting and trying to deal with Trumpian tariffs, how to deal with that, the bilateral approach, as I pointed out. Secondly, how does the Chinese exports, which cannot go anymore to the US, coming to India, how do we handle that? Then China is not the only competitor. Others competitors, as I said, Vietnam, Indonesia, Japan, several others all around the world. So the entire world market, as I said, is going on a topsy-turvy. And what will it lead to? My last point, as I said, I'll make another sort of pointed one on India sector-wise. What are the impacts? But what is the last point? That exactly as the 1861 to the 1933 period, when America had imposed almost, as I said, 50 to 60% tariffs on the entire world. And what did it lead to? The economic depression of 1929. And that kind of what it sort of, it was worse than what happened during the COVID. So in the same way, the Trumpian tariffs, the terror, people are calling it the terror tariffs, it is roiling the markets. It is going to have a massive inflationary pressure both on the US and the rest of the world. And third, and worse, it is dragging the world towards a global recession. And it has almost, the US is standing on the verge of a recession. And it's going to have very, very long-term negative effect, very difficult to get out of it. And finally, the last point, will the US gain at all? Maybe a few industry here and there. But in the 4 years that Trump has, after all, America lost its manufacturing base for smaller goods. Let's say making car seats for, toddlers in a car. You can't get one manufactured in America. Now, does Trump think, given the fact that American wages are much higher than wages in China or India or Mexico or other parts of the developing world, does Trump imagine that there will be domestic manufacturers for such small items, or in fact, all small items in America? And I'm saying small because, of course, when it comes to things like electric cars or other fancy cars, many of it is made in the US. I'm talking about smaller items that people use, daily use. Those items are all made in China, Mexico, India, other countries. Does Trump think that in the next 4 years he's going to start creating industries for all those in the US? He's living in a dream world. That is not going to happen. And therefore, American consumers will be hurt, and so will consumers in the rest of the world. So this is something very serious, very negative. It is leading, as I said, the world towards an economic depression. Thank you very much. As I said, I'll make one specifically on the impact of Trumpian tariffs on India, how it will affect us, and is there a way out? Thank you once more.